Hello folks, and welcome back to the Tiny Fibre Studio. I'm Bex and this is another video in the 51 Yarns series. If you're new, I'm making a video about each of the 51 yarn prompts from the PLY Magazine book 51 Yarns to Spin Before You Cast Off, and this is number 35, which is double coated inner coat. This is one where I am definitely not an expert, so you're joining me on a little voyage of discovery, and it requires a little bit of a backstory. At Wonderwool in 2022, my friends and I had the pleasure of being in the company of Mars from Hayboundberry and Anne from Middlebrick Fibre Works, who produces the most beautiful yarn from her flock of much-loved Shetland sheep. Mars had pre-warned me that Anne has a track record of finding the best, most tempting items at any show, and oh boy did she live up to her reputation. Over breakfast on Sunday, we were discussing what we wanted to buy at the last day of the show, and I happened to mention that 3 of the prompts for this 51 yarn series involved working with double-coated fleece. So I wanted to try and find something that would fulfill that criteria. Originally, I was thinking that something like Icelandic would probably be the most likely option. But while I was distracted by trying out some spinning wheels, Anne came over and was like, "Bex, there's Qiviut!" And sure enough, there was. Now, a quick introduction if you're not familiar. Qiviut is the Inuit name given to the fine down undercoat that's produced by a musk ox. Musk oxen have a quadruple layered coat to protect them from the cold in their native Arctic, and the coarser fibres that protect the down layer have to be removed by hand before spinning. Incidentally, there are regional spelling and pronunciation variations of Qiviut throughout the indigenous communities of the Arctic. I'm going with Qiviut as it's the one that I've seen used most frequently in the fibre community. Qiviut is known for being incredibly fine in the region of 15 microns, give or take, super soft and ridiculously warm. It's commonly believed to be 8 times warmer than wool. Possibly Qiviut's most notorious characteristic, though, is that it is one of the world's most expensive fibres, just due to its rarity and the amount of work that's required to process it. To give you a rough idea, the only 100% Qiviut yarn I could find listed in the UK cost the equivalent of £440, which is about $550 for 100 grams. Now I know what you're thinking, yeah, but that's for yarn that's already finished, where all the work's been done for you, and you can't possibly compare that to fibre. And that's a fair point. The only UK source of Qiviut fibre I can find at the moment is some exquisite combed Qiviut tops from Ashen Flock on Etsy, where 100 grams is £249, which is about $310. But again, that's had a lot of processing done to it to get it to the combed form. So what would you expect to pay for raw muskox fibre? How about £5 per 100 grams? Yeah. That's about $6. So obviously I had to buy some. I was very good. I did leave some for other people, but I did buy about 300 grams of it. To my knowledge, this was just a one-off, so I'm not going to link the supplier because I don't want them to be inundated with requests that they can't fulfill. Qiviut Inc. sell raw Qiviut and roving along with some blends, so check them out if you're interested. I'd never handled anything like this before, so Mars, Anne and I spent a really lovely half hour in the sun getting our first impressions of this new to us fibre and discovering how to separate the different layers. Thank you so much to Mars for having the presence of mind to shoot some footage and share it with me. So the question is it worth it to put in the work to go from raw fibre to finished yarn? And as Anne wanted to know, what weight of yarn do you get from 100 grams of raw fibre? Because a large amount of that is waste if you're just looking for the finest Qiviut, although the other fibres can still be used for other things. In this video, I'm going to focus on getting to know this fibre, preparing it, and spinning a small sample. So from that glowing introduction, I bet you're dying to know, what does that decadent, luxury, exclusive fibre look like? Yeah. Frankly, it looks like I've scalped someone, and it really doesn't smell that great either. Raw muskox can be provided to spinners with varying amounts of the coarser hairs, but what you're seeing here is a combination of those 4 different fibre types which make muskoxen perfectly suited to surviving the freezing winter temperatures in the Arctic. The fine down that grows next to the skin has disorganised structure, which creates air pockets to trap the body heat and keep the muskox warm. But that down fibre is only going to be of any use when it's clean and dry. So it has 3 other layers of coarser fibres to protect it. As the weather gets warmer, the muskoxen naturally shed their insulating layers, and in commercial operations where countries allow domestication, it can just be combed out as it becomes loose. The fibre comes off the muskox in sheets with no distinct locks like you would find with wool. In Inuit and other indigenous cultures, the Qiviut is harvested from the hide instead, with the muskoxen population being maintained by strict quotas on hunting, or in some cases, depending on the habitat, people might be able to just pick it off trees or fences that the muskox has rubbed against. I've linked to a really interesting video in the description which shows a tour of the Inuit-operated Qiviut ink mill in Canada if you're interested in learning a little bit more about their process. I've also included a link to the Umimak Muskox Producers Cooperative from Alaska if you're interested in buying finished objects from Indigenous makers. To my knowledge, this particular muskox lived in a wildlife park in Scotland, although as of making this video in 2023, there are no muskoxen left in the UK, so this may be my only chance to work with it raw like this. To spin this, we need to pick out the coarser layers in a process called dehairing. If any of those coarser fibres are left in, they're going to feel really prickly and itchy in the finished yarn. I've experimented with washing the fibre when it's in its raw form and also after dehairing as well. When I washed it completely raw, it didn't really seem to release that much in the way of oil or dirt. The used water was quite clean, and so I didn't really see much advantage in that. I ended up choosing to wash most of it after dehairing and just hung it up in a mesh bag on a breezy day to get more of the dust to drop out. Obviously that's just my experience, so if you're processing raw Qiviut, try both options and see what you think. Later in the video we'll talk about some of the things to take into account when choosing how to spin it, but for now let's start dehairing this sheet of fibre. It's rolled into a ball with the down fibre that would have been against the animal's skin on the inside. So let's tease it open and have a little look. You have this really rough outer layer, and then hiding away underneath it all is this incredibly soft downy fluff. And even if you just put your hand on it for a second or two, you can feel how much heat it's holding on to. The most obvious types of fibre at the moment are these long skirt hairs. I'm just going to put my hands over the rest of the fibre and just pull these long skirt hairs away. They're coarse, so quite similar to horsehair, well over 30 centimetres long in this section, although they can grow to double that length, and they pull away very easily from the rest of the fibre. Now we've separated all the skirt hairs, you have shorter guard hairs which are still noticeably straighter and coarser than the surrounding fibre, but not as long or as coarse as the skirt hairs. They can be a little bit harder to identify, and I sometimes find it easier to flip the work over and work from the skin side, where you can see the contrast between the lighter down and the darker guard hairs a bit more easily. I'm working quite carefully here to avoid breaking the sheet up too much. The more intact you can keep the skin side, the easier I've found it to do the rest of the fibre prep. We've now removed almost all of the obvious coarse fibres, but you can tell that there are 2 distinct grades of fibre left: the intermediate straight hairs and the Qiviut itself. At this stage, it can be really helpful to get an idea of what you're looking for in the down fibre. So if you just pinch out a tiny little section from the skin side of the fleece, you'll be able to see what you're looking for, and that will make it easier to define whether what you're removing is what you're supposed to be removing. At this point, it's much harder to tell the two types of fibres apart just by looking at them. If you look at it from the side though, it's a bit easier to see that there is a distinct halo of these longer, darker and straighter fibres that are still a little bit coarser than the underlying down. To remove the intermediate hairs, I find it easiest to alternate between looking at the front and the back. And you can also try folding the sheet over with the skin side out and looking along the folded edge. The intermediate hairs will often be poking out on that edge, whereas it's pretty much impossible to get hold of the down fibres because they just sort of bury themselves inside. You might find it useful to use a magnifier and tweezers for this part, and it can also help to hold it up against light from a window or a light box. If you can't get them all at this stage, you can always just keep an eye out for them as you spin and just pick them out when they'll be a bit more obvious. Occasionally, you might get some skin flakes that are attached to the skin side of the down. They are not going to fall out during processing, so the best option is just to cut them out with a sharp pair of scissors. Although Qiviut fibre doesn't really felt, there are some areas of this fleece which were a little bit compacted. Most of them loosened up as I dehaired them, but there were a few areas where it didn't, and I'll probably just wash those areas and keep them in my coat pockets to use as hand warmers. For comparison, these are the 4 layers that we've seen: the skirt hairs, guard hairs, intermediate hairs, and finally the Qiviut itself. I find it really fascinating that one animal can produce such a massively different variety of fibres. I also think it's pretty incredible when you think about where we started compared to where we've finished. What we're left with now is just the down on its own, although there are still some variations within that, with some fibres being a little bit straighter than others. It's easier to feel this than it is to see it, and it's really up to you how far you want to go in separating it further. So what we've got now is just this gorgeous, really light, soft, bouncy, warm fibre. And even if you just put your hand on it for a few seconds, you can really feel it retaining the heat. This is one of those moments where I wish that I could just hand you some fibre through the screen, but apparently that doesn't work. So can somebody get on with that technology, please? That'd be great. Thanks. It takes a lot of time to go through this process. It took me about 6 hours to do 100 grams to a very basic standard, and I'd probably want to do another pass on it, to be honest. There's really no way of doing this entire process on a machine without a lot of human intervention to get all of the guard hairs out. So quite apart from the rarity, you can see why it's so expensive to produce this commercially. This is a very long and quite tedious process, but it is 100% worth it, and I think as long as you don't try and do the whole lot in one go, it's actually really satisfying when you get all the way down to those really fine soft fibres. And after a quick weigh-in, we're left with 53 grams of Qiviut from our original 100 grams, so just over a 50% yield. Before we get into talking about spinning Qiviuts, this video has taken about 30 hours to make so far. So if you're finding it interesting, please click the like button, subscribe and share it with others who might find it useful. All of those things genuinely really help the channel out. And if you'd like to support the channel financially, the links are in the description and the pinned comment below this video. Thank you so much to everyone who has helped me continue making these videos. I massively appreciate it. Now let's get back to talking about spinning Qiviut. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are a few things to consider when it comes to spinning this stuff. The first is the cost. Although this is less of an issue for me because I got really lucky in the way that I bought it, it's still a really precious commodity and I want to make the most of it. Fortunately, because the fibres are so fine, it really wants to be spun very fine as well, and you could easily add it to other fibres to make it go further, either by using one single of Qiviut and one of another fibre, holding it double when knitting or crocheting, using it as intermittent stripes of weft in weaving, making it part of stranded colourwork pattern in knitting, and so on. There's loads of ways. We could also consider blending it with other fibres before spinning. Silk is a very popular option for this. You just need to cut the silk to be a similar staple length to the Qiviut before blending, otherwise you'll have one very short fibre and one very long staple length. Blending with wool is also another possibility, and it might help with the second consideration, which is the lack of memory. When people talk about memory in relation to fibre, what they mean is that the fibres might have a tendency to want to slip past each other and stretch the finished object. So a sweater that began life finishing at your hip might be down to your knees in no time. In the case of Qiviut, that's because the individual fibres don't really have any scales or organised crimp, which accounts for their extreme softness, but it also means that, unlike wool, there's less friction holding the fibres together in the resulting yarn, so it has a tendency to continually stretch. I'll need to consider that when I choose how to spin and work with the yarn. I might look at blending it with something like merino, which would help it to go further, and I could also use the merino to help hold the shape of the finished object. But spinning also plays a part in this. Although worsted spinning is generally seen as being stronger, because of that lack of scales on the fibre, if I were to spin this worsted, there would be a greater opportunity for the fibres to slide past each other. Whereas woolen spinning might trap them in place a bit more effectively, and would also trap heat in those pockets of air inside the yarn. Which leads me on to the third thing that I'm going to think about when I'm considering how to spin this, and that is the incredible warmth. Anyone who knows me in real life will tell you that I'm pretty much always cold, but a sweater made of 100% Qiviut would be overkill even for me. Plus there's the memory issue to consider, so I'd want to use it in a project where I can really take advantage of that additional warmth. Some popular options include lace cowls and scarves or shawls, where there's not much in the way of unsupported weight. It's likely that the yarn is going to bloom a lot, so it will tend to fill in the holes in lace knitting a bit, especially if it's woolen spun, so I would want to keep the lace fairly simple, but the lace holes should also help to give that excess heat a chance to escape if it needs to. Let me know in the comments what you think I should make with it. In my first spinning sample, I tried just spinning it long draw straight from the cloud, using my front hand to regulate the twist going into the drafting zone, and also to pull back against. So opening my fingers to let some twist in, then pinching and pulling back, and continuing to open my fingers briefly to allow more twist in when I needed it. It worked reasonably well, but there was a little bit of clumping where a few of the butt ends of the down went through at the same time, and I thought it might be more consistent if I carded it first. I only did a couple of passes because whenever you work with fine fibres, you have to balance your desire to make them more easily spinnable with the risk of doing harm to the fibre. The more you card them, the more the chance that you'll start creating neps and other problems that weren't there to begin with. I did this little sample on the Electric Eel Nano 2. Partly because I just like the irony of spinning one of the most expensive fibres in the world on one of the world's most affordable e-spinners, but also because the Nano has very light take-up, so you're not fighting against the break tension. I used the same attenuated long draw technique, again opening my fingers to let a bit of twist in, then pinching and pulling back, and just adding more twist by releasing my fingers if I needed to. If you struggle with the tension on your wheel being too strong when you're spinning fine fibres, there are some tricks that you can use. I'll do a full video on this at some point, but one easy option is cross-lacing the flyer. It just means creating zigzags in the path your yarn takes onto the flyer. Each of those zigzags reduces the tension and therefore you don't have to be fighting against the break. I also tried a sample where I carded some Qiviut with a white silk and merino blend, cut so that the staple length matched the length of the Qiviut down. I think that's a really nice colour contrast, as well as just being a nice little blend. So I've got a small bunch of little baby mini skeins to knit some samples with, and I'll use that to help me decide what to do with the rest of my fibre, and I'll keep you updated with my plans. If you're still with me, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring Qiviut with me. Take a look at this video next, and I will see you again soon.